I made a few short TikTok videos the other day about this, but I have a little bit of time today, so I figured I might as well make a longer, a little bit more in-depth video here. But, I mean, just how funny is this? The Indianapolis Colts went on to sign Philip Rivers on December 9th. And what's so funny about this is that, 3 weeks ago, I made this video talking all about how there is this big horse theme that's going on and how it involves the number 324. And even in the beginning of the video, I was talking about how it also involves the name Philip, because the name Philip just so happens to mean lover of horses. And, I went on to talk about how in 2014, just before the Chinese horse year, where the Denver Broncos lost to the Seattle Seahawks in the Super Bowl, I talked about how, like, Phil Robertson of Duck Dynasty was in the news, and how Uncle Phil from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air had died, and how a guy named Philip Phillips was singing the pregame show, and he was singing a song called Gone, Gone, Gone at the Super Bowl, and they went to breaking news that the actor Philip Seymour Hoffman had died. Of course, then the Broncos went on to lose to the Seahawks in the Super Bowl that year. But once again, it was during a Chinese horse year. Think about the Broncos, who have the white Bronco, the horse logo. And the name Philip means lover of horses. So what are the odds now that the Indianapolis Colts go on to sign Philip Rivers? And of course, if you read out the name Philip Rivers, it just so happens to equal 324. This big number that I was talking about in that video. This number 324 also, in that video, I was talking about the relationship to the Broncos and the Colts, because guys like Peyton Manning, who played for the Colts and the Broncos, his birthday just so happens to be March 24th, like 324. And if you go back to 2022, the Broncos ended up signing Russell Wilson, right? Russell Wilson, who is the quarterback who played for the Seahawks and defeated the Broncos in the 2014 Super Bowl, right? Super Bowl 48. But the Broncos signed this guy in 2022, just before Peyton Manning's birthday. And then on Peyton Manning's birthday, 324, there was a stadium fire that happened at the Denver Broncos Stadium. And of course, I also pointed out how Russell Wilson and these composite ciphers that I have been saying have been important since the assassination of Donald Trump. Russell Wilson equals 324, and he now plays for the New York Giants, although he doesn't really play, but he's on the New York Giants, and that's interesting because Peyton Manning's brother used to be the big man at the New York Giants, Eli Manning, and he got replaced by Daniel Jones, and Daniel Jones, whose name equals 324 also, but Daniel Jones was the guy who played for the Colts who tore his Achilles, which is the reason why the Colts now signed Philip Rivers, right? Philip, lover of horses. Think about the Colts in relation to horses. And then Philip Rivers also equals 324. And to go even further with this same old narrative, right? I was talking about the importance of Philip and lover of horses with Super Bowl 48, the Seahawks versus the Broncos. What are the odds that Philip Rivers' first game back when he plays for the Colts, he plays the Seattle Seahawks, of all teams, the Seattle Seahawks? And of course, I did blog all about how the day before they signed him, the Eagles played the Chargers, and the Chargers are Philip Rivers' old team. And, I was talking all about Kobe Bryant here. But on December 8th, which is Philip Rivers' birthday, the Eagles played the Chargers, and then the next day the Colts signed Philip Rivers. And that was interesting because Kobe is from Philadelphia, and then he spent his career in Los Angeles, like the Eagles and the Chargers. And Kobe also known for tearing his Achilles. I even have a video from the summer of 2019 talking about how I thought the whole season was going to be scripted around Kobe Bryant and his Achilles injury, and that had to do with the Lakers in that summer signed DeMarcus Cousins, and DeMarcus Cousins in 2018 tore his Achilles, and I blog post and made videos talking about how that was connected to Kobe Bryant tearing his Achilles. And, DeMarcus Cousins then signed with the Lakers, And DeMarcus Cousins tore his Achilles on January 26th. Then, about later that year, Kobe Bryant went on to die on January 26th. But the date 12/8, which is also Philip Rivers' birthday, that's also the day that Kobe Bryant made his return after tearing his Achilles in history. And this is also Dwight Howard's birthday. Remember how there was the Chris Paul trade where Chris Paul, that trade got annulled, so Chris Paul couldn't go to the Lakers, and then the Lakers went on to sign Dwight Howard, and then Kobe Bryant tore his Achilles later that year. That was all on December 8th. That annulled trade was on December 8th, which was Dwight Howard's birthday, which was also the same day in history that Kobe Bryant would return from his Achilles injury. And then, think about how the Clippers just let Chris Paul go, right? They're doing this narrative. Also, in 2019, after the Lakers signed DeMarcus Cousins ended up getting hurt. So then the Lakers signed Dwight Howard again, and they signed Dwight Howard on Kobe Bryant's birthday, just before Kobe Bryant would go on to die. Of course, Dwight Howard's full name equals 126, and Kobe's wife was born on the 126th day of the year. And, the year Kobe tore his Achilles, the Lakers owner, Jerry Buss, just so happened to die 1 month and 26 days before Kobe tore his Achilles. And, just before Kobe died, the Lakers owner's ex-wife had died. Not Jeannie, I can't think of what her name is right now, but Jerry Buss's ex-wife died right before Kobe Bryant died. Kobe was also born in a Chinese horse year, and he tore his Achilles in a Chinese snake year. And of course, Daniel Jones just tore his Achilles in the Chinese snake year. Daniel Jones is born in the year of the ox, and the horse and the ox are enemies in Chinese astrology. So it makes a lot of sense that he would get injured with all this horse symbolism going on. Also, remember when Prince Philip died during the year of the ox? And my friend Phil was in an ATV accident during the year of the ox. My friend Phil, also a guy who used to love riding horses and loved horses, and he ended up getting injured during the year of the ox. But the funny thing with all this Kobe Bryant symbolism, I didn't even realize that there is a player on the Seattle Seahawks named Kobe Bryant, and he sealed the game. The game sealing play when Philip Rivers played his first game back against the Seahawks, Kobe Bryant actually intercepted the ball. This guy named Kobe Bryant, of all people. It's like, what are the odds of that, Another interesting thing is this game was played on December 14th, and if you go back to 2020 and use the span of days and go to December 14th from the day Kobe Bryant died, just happens to be 324 days. Also, if you look up when Philip Rivers announced his retirement for the Colts, it just so happened to be January 20th. It wasn't in 2025, but just the date January 20th. If you go to the date that he re-signed, December 9th, January 20th to December 9th is also 324 days. And maybe I said Daniel Jones, but Philip Rivers, when he first retired from the Colts, it was January 20th. And then when he re-signed, it was December 9th. And these two dates are 324 days apart. But Philip Rivers also mostly known for playing for the Chargers, right? And the Chargers' original logo just so happens to be a horse. Thank you, Bobby Simpson, for pointing this out to me. And a charger is apparently a war horse, right? So it's another interesting thing connected to this horse narrative. There was also memes going around with Uncle Phil as the quarterback for the Colts, right? Uncle Phil. Just like how I talked about Uncle Phil in my previous video. Think about Philadelphia too, West Philadelphia. The Eagles played the Chargers on Philip Rivers' birthday, right after Daniel Jones tears Achilles, and then the next day they signed Philip Rivers. But another thing that I talked about in this video here, I talked a lot about O.J. Simpson and the connection to O.J. Simpson. And a lot of this has to do with how in 2022 there was a stadium fire on 3/24/2022 at the Denver Broncos Stadium, and that also just so happens to be the birthday of Damar Hamlin. And remember, later that year in the football season, Damar Hamlin had collapsed. And think about, arguably the most famous Buffalo Bills player who Damar Hamlin played for is O.J. Simpson, right? And O.J. Simpson's name just so happens to equal 324, right? Renthal James Simpson, 324. And even if you write out like Nicole Simpson, it equals 324. His wife, who supposedly, he didn't murder, supposedly. Remember, just before Super Bowl 50, where the Broncos beat the Carolina Panthers, right? The Netflix released this documentary, or whatever it is, a crime story called The People versus O.J. Simpson. They released it just before Super Bowl 50, where the Broncos went on to win the Super Bowl that year against the Black Panther with Cam Newton, and Huey P. Newton was the founder of the Black Panthers. And that Super Bowl was in the San Francisco Bay where the Black Panthers were founded, and Beyonce was in the halftime show, and Beyonce did the Black Panther tribute. Of course, this year, the opening game of the season was a big old tribute to Beyonce's 44th birthday. And when Jalen Carter, the cowboy, or Jalen Carter spit on the cowboy, right? Cowboy Carter. And the Cowboy Carter album just so happens to have the white Bronco on it. Cowboy Carter. Just so happens to have Beyonce riding the white horse, at least. I don't know if it's a Bronco, but it's a white horse. And of course, Super Bowl 50, where Beyonce performed and did the Black Panther tribute and all that. The other people that played with her at halftime, one of them was Coldplay, the main one. And remember the Coldplay Kiss Cam stuff? Think about it. The Coldplay Kiss Cam stuff all summer. It's linked up to the Denver Broncos. And once again, if you go back to that opening game of the season with the Cowboy Carter game on Beyonce's birthday, right? Remember, there was another Dallas Cowboy player who died, Marshawn Kneeland. And Marshawn just reminds me of Marshawn Lynch and the Seattle Seahawks and so on too. But, Marshawn Kneeland, his name equaled 324, just like how Dallas Cowboys equals 324. And this guy even played for the Western Michigan Broncos at college. So there is some definite narrative that's going on here, It even says he died in Frisco, Texas. And the Super Bowl this year is played in San Francisco, That is, some people call it Frisco. We also had that Midtown Manhattan shooter earlier this year where they said he was trying to shoot up the NFL office, and then they told us his high school and all that, and it was the same high school that John Elway went to. Think about John Elway in relation to the Colts and the Broncos, and this horse theme as well. And Midtown Manhattan equals 324. So there's definitely something going on with this theme that I'm talking about. It involves horses. The number 324 seems to be related to the Broncos, the Colts, the Chargers even now with the horse logo, all kinds of stuff. But then so the same week that Phillip Rivers makes his debut against the Seahawks, we get all this stuff in the news of there's a Brown shooting. We got the death of Rob Reiner and his wife by being stabbed. And once again, I've talked about O.J. Simpson all year. I don't know what... I got to be the only person to talk about O.J. Simpson in relation to the white Bronco pretty much all summer. Talk about this thing with horses and so on. But, think about the Brown shooting, and then think about O.J. Simpson's wife, Nicole Brown Simpson. And Rob Reiner and his wife even got stabbed in Brentwood. Let me see if I can find it here. They were stabbed in Brentwood, and that's interesting because look where Nicole Brown Simpson was stabbed at. She was stabbed in Brentwood, right? The same place. So the same weekend we get the Rob Reiner stabbing, we get the Brown University shooting, and they both died in Brentwood. And then we also had that the Bondi beach attack or whatever, and one of the guys, his name or his address just so happens to be Brown Road. What are the odds of that? Brown Road. And what's even crazier is that, for the past week, I've had, this crazy infected tooth, and I also had this crazy infected tooth about a month ago. And I'm talking like so crazy. I actually went to the doctor, and I never go to the doctor, but it was like I had like a baseball like right here of like infection, and it's crazy because I don't have any like my other teeth are completely fine, but back on April 17th, 2024, like there was these new Laffy Taffy things at work, and one of the girls bought a bag of them, and I ate one, and I bit down, and there was like a hard brown piece or something, and it busted part of my tooth off, and it's been fine, but in the last 6 months or so, it just every time I like eat or anything, like it gets infected, it feels like. But the last two times it's happened, it's been really, really bad. And I don't know. I went to the doctor to get some antibiotics and whatever, so I can eventually, hopefully, just get it pulled. But there's no way the dentist is going to pull this tooth with it being that infected. So, moral of the story is that I had this crazy infected tooth, and I blogged about it back in November, which I think is the only time I've blogged about it. And in that blog post, I talked about O.J. Simpson and the Broncos and this horse theme. I just want to show this post in November. I was talking about my tooth hurting, crazy tooth infection, and then a little bit further down, I'm talking about O.J. Simpson and whatever back in November. And I didn't really even think anything of it, but I went back and I was looking at my old blog post the other day. So I got this new tooth infection that it was really bad, and I was like, huh, I'm gonna go back and look at the day that I broke my tooth because I knew I blogged about it, and look at the blog post. I'm talking about my broken tooth, and I'm talking about O.J. Simpson in 2024. Talk about my broken tooth and O.J. Simpson of all things, and notice even my original blog post about the death of O.J. Simpson. So I broke this tooth like 1 week exactly after O.J. died. I'm talking about the horse synchronicity in this post about O.J. Simpson dying. But, what was so interesting about this original post is I'm talking about how they had a hard brown piece in it, right? This Laffy Taffy had a hard brown piece that broke my tooth, brown. And then the same day as the Brown University shooting, my tooth started hurting like crazy again, and it got really infected. And then we get all the, that's connected to Rob Reiner being stabbed in Brentwood, where Nicole Brown Simpson was stabbed. And they also, that Brown shooting, they also told us that the Buffalo Bills were near. They were staying at a hotel near where that shooting happened. If I can find it here. The Buffalo Bills were down the street from the Brown shooting. What are the odds of that? The Buffalo Bills were just down the street from the Brown shooting. OJ, known for being the Bill, and supposedly didn't kill his wife, Nicole Brown. Then we get the Rob Reiner stabbings in Brentwood, which is where Nicole Brown had died. And I'm talking about this connection to my tooth. They got infected that same day, and it was broke because of a brown piece that was in a Laffy Taffy. Another interesting thing with this tooth breaking is that my original post, I talked about Isaiah Thomas signing with the Suns. And the reason that I talked about this, me breaking a tooth and Isaiah Thomas signing with the Suns, is that if you go back to 2017, when Isaiah Thomas's sister had died, she died in a car crash, and she died in King County, Washington. And, he played for the Kings and a bunch of stuff, a bunch of King symbolism. This was in 2017. But if you go back then, and then think about Washington with the Seahawks and so on too, it's just interesting that Phillip Rivers' first game would be against the Seahawks. But his sister died in this car, and at the time, my girlfriend drove a car that looked identical to that car, and I thought that was really strange. I was like, weird that my girlfriend is driving the same type of car that his sister, China, died in. And my girlfriend lost one of her front teeth, right? Like her front tooth was whatever, she lost it that year. And then like 2 weeks after Isaiah Thomas's sister died, he was playing a game and he got his front tooth knocked out, and it was the exact same tooth that my girlfriend had lost. And I was like, what in the world is going on here? So his sister dies in a car that looks just like my girlfriend's, and my girlfriend lost her front tooth, and then Isaiah Thomas 2 weeks later loses that exact same tooth. So I knew there was something interestingly connected to that. So I have this blog post about me breaking my tooth. And if you go to November of 2024, let's see here, November of 2024, another one of Isaiah Thomas's sisters died. So just after I broke part of my tooth, in November later that year, Isaiah Thomas's sister, another sister, ended up dying. And I found out about it on my girlfriend's birthday. I had no idea about the story until November 23rd, which is my girlfriend's birthday. And I'm like, what are the odds of that, you know? And then just after that, my first son, Alistair, lost his first tooth on Alistair Crowley's death day. And I couldn't find that tooth to be the tooth fairy, right? And she said she put it in her tarot card coffee cup. And I didn't even know she had a tarot card coffee cup. And I found it and I was looking at it and I was like, crazy, because every time that I've had experiences with tarot cards over the years, my basement starts flooding. And this stems back to when I went and got my old tarot cards and I left them in my car, then my car broke down and I brought them in the house. Then my kids were playing with them one day and I was like, oh crap, they're not supposed to touch them. And when I was picking them up, only one of them was face up, or the one that was facing up was the Six of Swords, and it was upside down. And when I looked at the Six of Swords, it said that there'd be floods in your life. And then my basement started flooding the very next day, right? And then I was watching that movie called Tarot years later, and it was in August, and a big piece in that movie just so happens to be the Six of Swords. And like 3 days after I watched that movie, my basement started flooding again. And then recently my basement started flooding again on November 29th, which I think is Russell Wilson's birthday even. But this time when he lost that tooth and it was in the cup of water, right, in my girlfriend's tarot card coffee mug that I never knew existed, I looked up the tarot card that was on that coffee mug and it said that you're going to get a bonus at work. And then like 2 weeks later, the owner of the store that I work at decided to sell the store, and she sold the store and then gave me a $3,000 bonus. It was like, what are the odds of that, you know? So, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what it all means. Maybe I should bust out my tarot cards and start actually just using the tarot cards, but there's something going on with how all these things are interrelated. You know, my basement flooded again, then my tooth hurts. I look up the old post about my breaking my tooth. It has to do with O.J. Simpson, and my first post about O.J. Simpson has to do with a horse theme, talking all about O.J. Simpson, this horse theme. Then we get these Brown shootings, the Brown shooting, and I have a Brown piece that breaks the Laffy Taffy, synced up to Rob Reiner being stabbed in Brentwood, where Nicole Brown was stabbed. I mean, it's crazy. Let's see here. And the Bondi Beach guy that lived on Brown Road. The Cleveland Browns also lost to the Chicago Bears that same weekend, right? And they became 10-4. And the Buffalo Bills also became 10-4 that day. And of course, OJ died on April 10th, which is a lot like 10/4 or 4/10. If you read out Rob Reiner, it equals 104. I'm piggybacking on things that I've seen from other people too, but you know, it's just interesting how it all comes together. But the quarterback for the Bears is Caleb Williams, who won the Heisman Trophy with USC, just like how O.J. Simpson won the Heisman Trophy with USC. And if you look up John Heisman, his birthday his death day just so happened to be October 3rd, which is the day in history that O.J. Simpson was found not guilty for the murder of his wife and Ronald Goldman. But then 13 years later, it was the day that he was found guilty for the robbery in Las Vegas, and then he was let out of prison on October 1st, 2017, the day of the Jason Aldean Las Vegas attack, the Route 91 Harvest Festival, and so on. O.J. Simpson was released from prison that day, and that stands out for a number of reasons. Because if you go back and look at my blog post about the Midtown Manhattan shooter, I had this weird synchronicity with phone calls and people from New York calling me. They called me 3 times, and then I told my mom that there's probably going to be some shooting in New York. And then a little bit later, I went to the news, and the headline story was the Midtown Manhattan shooter in New York. And it reminded me a lot of 2017 when I was getting these phone calls that were connected to Las Vegas And then we got the Las Vegas attack after the guy who got the perfect showcase on The Price is Right reached out to me. And he was from Las Vegas. And when he was on the show, he had a shirt that even said Las Vegas on it and so on. Then we got the Las Vegas attack. So there's something interrelated there. 2017 was also the year of the big kneeling and Donald Trump calling out the kneeling, and the Eagles went on to win the Super Bowl. And if you were following me back in 2017 too, right around that time, I was talking about this big theme with Charles Manson that ended up being related to Marilyn Manson. And then there was this whole theme with the film Stand By Me, which is interesting because Rob Reiner is the director of Stand By Me. So there has to be something. I just saw some allegations that Corey Feldman said something about how Corey Haim actually molested him or something just the other day. So I don't know. There's some. I'm paying attention to something with the movie Stand By Me. There has to be something going on because it's connected back to that same narrative with the Las Vegas attack and O.J. Simpson being let out of prison. But the guy who won the Heisman, not only did he die on October 3rd, that big day with O.J. Simpson being found not guilty and then later being found guilty, he also went to Brown University. And Brown University's nickname just so happens to be the Bears, right? Think about how the Bears beat the Browns. Now it's connected to Caleb Williams, the Heisman Trophy winner from USC, like O.J. Simpson. The guy who just won the Heisman Trophy this year, the Indiana Hoosiers guy, his birthday is October 1st, the same day that O.J. Simpson was released from prison, the same day as the Las Vegas attack. And like I said, I have a whole playlist on this stuff from 2017 about the film Stand By Me and how it was related to that narrative. I'm going to skip over some of this. I had a lot of synchronicity with the number 50 lately. That Stand By Me stuff also went back to Wendy Williams, who's connected to this horse narrative that I've talked about over the years, from a song that I have where I say Wendy Williams looks like a horse. But Jerry O'Connell, the fat kid on Stand By Me, was on her show back in 2017, I think on Halloween, and she was dressed as the Statue of Liberty and she collapsed. And Rob Reiner's birthday also is March 6th, which is 3 months and 24 days after my birthday. And that's also a big day I had after the Eagles won the Super Bowl from the 2017 narrative. I had this dream about my dad dying, and I was talking about these bridge collapses. Then 9 days later, we had this bridge collapse. Just check out my videos. I have a video with the number 9 in the thumbnail. It's really long, a lot to re-explain. But it's somehow related to this, you know? That was the day that I had this dream about my father dying, which just so happened to be the same day of this girl I went to high school with. That's her birthday. And I also had a dream that her father died. And then her father ended up dying the very next day. And I had that dream on O.J. Simpson's birthday. So there is something interesting here. My Uncle Clancy also died right after the Eagles won the Super Bowl in 2017, and he died on 4/17, the same day that I broke this tooth in 2024. So, my grandma also died in connection to the Eagles being in the Super Bowl that year. My sister was connected. Then a girl from her town ended up drowning in Sioux Falls. All kinds of stuff. Let's see here. So another thing that happened in the news was the Chiefs ended up getting eliminated from the playoffs, and then Patrick Mahomes supposedly tore his ACL and all that. And that's interesting because if you think about Taylor Swift, and Taylor Swift just released this mini-series on Disney Plus called The End of an Era. Think about that. The end of an era. Think about the Chiefs, how they've been dominating forever, and now they don't even make the playoffs. The end of an era, and then the Chiefs lose. And she released this documentary or this mini-series on 12/12. And if you go back to August this year, Taylor Swift also announced her new album that was going to be coming out called The Life of a Showgirl, which makes you think of Las Vegas again, that Las Vegas attack. But she released that on October 3rd, which is the day in history O.J. was found not guilty and then later found guilty and then went to jail and got out on the same day as the Las Vegas attack. But she released this miniseries on 12/12. When she announced that album, she did it at 12:12 in the morning on August 12th for her 12th studio album. Even if you go back to my post back in August, where I was talking about Taylor Swift's engagement and new album announcement, I also talked about how Taylor Swift usually codes the number 13 into everything, right? So it made me think that the Chiefs weren't going to be in the Super Bowl this year because, it's the number 12. It's not the number 13. And the interesting thing about the number 13, though, is the fact that, she released this new album, The Life of a Showgirl, on October 3rd. That day connected to O.J. Simpson. And O.J. Simpson being found not guilty to the day O.J. Simpson was found guilty was 13 years apart. So there's something connected there, And notice even in my old blog post, I even talked about O.J. Simpson in that old blog post and the Las Vegas attack. So that it seems that there's something connected to that 2017 Las Vegas attack narrative, especially with that Midtown Manhattan shooter that I had Synchronicity with earlier this year. Taylor Swift also announced her engagement on August 26th, wasn't it? Yeah, August 26th, I think, was the day that she announced the engagement. And, that's interesting in relation to the kneeling during the national anthem narrative that got real big in 2017 because August 26th just so happened to be the day where the Colin Kaepernick controversy first began, right? It first began in the preseason on August 26th of 2016. And like I've said in previous videos, that actually, Kaepernick connects to the Rams. It's an interesting narrative here, but if you're thinking about the lost 2017 stuff, seems connected to the Eagles to me. But August 26th was also the day that Bob Barker had died. And think about how my 2017 Las Vegas narrative was connected to The Price is Right and Bob Barker. And I even made a video or blog post just before Bob Barker died, talking about how I thought Bob Barker would possibly die that year. And then a week later, Bob Barker ended up dying. And just before Bob Barker died, Jason Aldean was in the news with Tupac and whatever. I have a whole video on that. You can find that. It was synced up to Super Bowl 58, I believe, that was held in Las Vegas, right? I don't even know. I can't even remember who was in Super Bowl 58, tell you the truth. Super Bowl 58. The 49ers and the Chiefs, right? Which is interesting just for the fact that the 49ers are hosting the Super Bowl this year. 49ers most likely are going to make the playoffs, I think. Colin Kaepernick connected to that. Marshawn Kneeland, whose final game was on Colin Kaepernick's birthday. There's a lot of interesting narratives going on here. Just seems to all go back to that Las Vegas attack somehow, and O.J. Simpson. And then, you connect in the horse theme with 324. Also, the 1989 Super Bowl was I can't remember if it was 1989 Super Bowl. Maybe it was the 89 season. Must have been the 89 season. It's 88. This is the 89 season. The Super Bowl was the 49ers versus the Broncos. They got super blown out there. But just thinking about the connection to Taylor Swift, right? Being born in 1989, even has an album called 1989. So, keep paying attention to the narrative here. I see a narrative, I just never know what it exactly means, And there's a bunch of other narratives too, that people could follow. But this horse narrative just seems to be connected to every single other narrative that I'm following. All seems to go back to that Las Vegas 2017 stuff. And then you got Stand By Me right after that with Rob Reiner is connected to that. That was also connected to Marilyn Manson releasing the song Say 10, where the original thing had the assassination of Donald Trump. Even the August 12th to 12/12 is 122 days, like how Kansas City equals 112. Like how San Francisco equals 112. Or 122. I don't know, 112, whatever. San Francisco equals 122. Kansas City equals 122. 12 August 12th, the day that she announced her album release, to 12/12, the day she released End of an Era, is 122 days later, I believe. So it's interesting. We will leave it there. Hopefully you get the gist of it. Something weird, like, the world is crazy. Everything's connected, I've been saying this forever. It's like a lot of times, like, synchronicities and weird things that happen to me are the reason that I'm even following a narrative, you know. So, yeah, I'm done rambling. I got other stuff I got to get done today, but have a good one. Peace out. Actually, one last thing. I'm going to pay attention to UFC 324. Like, what are the odds there's a UFC 324 just before the Super Bowl this year? And remember, UFC 322 was pretty revealing to that 9/11 symbolism that they had a bunch going on back in November. The guy's name was even Tower, and the other guy's name was Islam. Right after they elected Zohran Mamdani and Dick Cheney died and all that. So I don't know that much about UFC. I couldn't even tell you who these guys are that are fighting. So, but it's interesting. January 24th. I'm gonna probably watch that UFC actually. Or if I don't, I'll definitely look into it. I'm sure there's something to do with something going on there, and it's in Las Vegas. Maybe they all are. I don't even know. But yeah, I'll leave it there though. Just I don't know why. I wanted to just point that out really quick. It's interesting. There's a UFC 324 just a couple weeks before the Super Bowl. So have a good one.